Okay, so it is my pleasure to welcome to Paranormal Blip Kelly Chase, responsible for the absolutely extraordinary UFO Rabbit Hole podcast. Hello there, Kelly.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
That's okay. That's okay, Kelly. It's my pleasure. I was just telling you just a second ago, like I think your podcast is absolutely brilliant, and so I'm really looking forward to talking about the podcast, but also I want to, of course, then talk about the uh, Ohio UFO Heritage Conference that's coming up in May. Yep, and you've got an incredible lineup of speakers there. Okay, so on in Britain, Kelly, we've got this like probably the most important kind of news channel in the morning is this radio show. It's not television, it's radio. And it's Radio 4. And there's a guy in there, like an interviewer who's started working there. His name is Amal Rajan, and he's really good interviewer. But whenever he does an interview, he does this really interesting thing that I've never heard of before. He says to the interviewee, he says, I've got two aims in this interview, and then he states the aims, which is quite a nice. I've never, of all my years of watching and listening to interviewers, but I think I'll nick that one from Amal tonight. So I've got two aims, Kelly. My aims are learn more about your podcast and learn more about the conference.
Well,
Does
that's
that sound
perfect. I love
okay?
that. Yeah, it sounds wonderful. And thank you so much for the kind words and the support of the podcast. It means so much to me.
Yeah, absolutely, no problem at all. Right, so let's begin then. What it was the kind of origin story of you thinking about the podcast, and how did it come about?
Well, it's kind of a crazy story because this has taken over my entire life. I have since walked away from my career. This is what I do 24/7 from the time I wake up till the time I go to bed. And 2 years ago today, I wasn't even thinking about UFOs. They weren't even on my radar. So, like, this has been a very intense sort of initiation into this field that
Yeah.
I've undergone over the last 2 years. And it really just started with the question. I had been a brand director for an e-com company. I'd been in marketing for years, did agency life for years, and I've been working 80 hours a week and like building this career. I was on the fast track to CMO. Like, that was my world. That was everything that I cared about. And I finally took a vacation in spring of 2021 with my family, and we were going to the Outer Banks, which is where I had my first UFO sighting when I was a kid. And I had never really thought about it since, because I told everybody what I saw, which was just basically a light in the sky that did a few right angle turns and moved much faster than it should have. Nothing like super profound, but I knew I saw something that couldn't be possible. But I told my family and I told my friends, and everyone just laughed at me. And so I just moved on with my life and assumed I must have been the one who was wrong. Right. So we were going to the Outer Banks, and I had started to sort of notice some of these UFO stories that had been in the news, although obviously this had been going on since 2017. But I think, like a lot of people, you see even today, there's all kinds of people who are like, UFOs are in the news. I didn't know that. Right.
Hmm.
So I thought, in this week, I'm going to learn everything that there is to know about UFOs, and I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to figure out what, on this vacation. And it just started it. It just opened the door for me. And I very quickly realized I was not going to figure it out in a week. Um, and I got into just really intensely studying all aspects of this. And a few months into it, I ended up, I don't talk about this a ton, but I'm starting to talk about it more because I think it's important, because I'm realizing it's not just me that it's happened to. Um, which is that I was sitting in my bedroom one morning with books spread all around me. It was a Saturday morning in August of 2021. I was getting ready for another day of just obsessively reading UFO books. And I had what I can only describe as the most intense psychedelic experience I've ever had in my life, condensed down into like 90 seconds.
Wow.
It's really hard to describe what I saw. Um, but it was a very profound experience where I felt as though I had a very brief insight into the nature of reality and of God, and I saw my entire life and how everything had led me to this moment. And I was kind of told that I was supposed to start this podcast. I know that sounds absolutely insane. And if you had told me 2 years ago, I would be like, man, like that sounds crazy. And I've so I started outlining it the next day. I started the website the next day, and this has just become an absolute obsession of mine. And it's hard to describe what happened to me. I've only recently started to really investigate it and to be
Mhm.
like, okay, what is this? And I've found the best descriptions that I found are in John Keel. He talks about in a book, in his book, Flying Saucer to the Center of Your Mind, I believe it's called. It's something very similar to that.
Mhm.
It talks about something called cosmic illumination. And apparently this is like something, what happened to me, what he described is exactly what happened to me. And apparently this has happened to people all throughout history. And I think it's happening, and it's happening all the time now because I'm meeting people who it's happened to in the last few years, which is like,
Mhm.
so yeah. So that's my very weird origin story.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So the was it that this sense that you needed to communicate what you like your research essentially and share your research?
Yes, I think that I was shown how I've had a very weird life. I've had a lot of different careers. I've kind of moved all around. I've traveled the world. I've done, and it's always seemed a little scattershot at times. But to be where I am now, I think I was really shown that everything that I'd gone through in my life had prepared me for this, and that this is what I was supposed to do. And I'm really passionate about it because that experience that I had changed my life in a really positive way beyond anything that has to do with the podcast. Like I went from being a really strict materialist and an atheist who believed in nothing to, really having a sense that there is a God and that there is meaning to life and that there is purpose. That in of itself is huge, and
Yeah.
I lost I'm somebody who, like, the first time when I was a kid, when somebody told me what death was, I remember my neighbor's dog had died, and I talked to my parents about it, and my dad said to me in kind of an offhand way, he was like, well, everybody dies. And I was like, hold the phone, because I didn't know that everybody died. I thought, like, I understood the concept of death, but I thought, like, if you had a heart attack or like got in a car crash or like something bad had to happen. I didn't realize
Sure.
that everyone died. And it sparked in me this like lifelong like almost crippling fear of death. And
Right.
it's gone. Like since that moment, I have not a single
Really?
fear of death. And so I feel like I want to spread whatever this is, even though I don't totally understand it, because it's been so positive for me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, totally. That's really I can really what's the word? Relate to that. That's the word. I can really relate to what you're saying, Kelly, because so I've got this heart condition, and when I was young, I mean, it's an absolute miracle that I'm alive, like genuinely. It's this weird heart, it shouldn't work, it's massive, it's malformed. I could go into it, but essentially, I'm really lucky to be alive and, very healthy, like relatively, and, more or less functioning. Um, but I grew up with this fear of death, like big time, and it wasn't just a kind of an abstract thing. Like there were a couple of near misses in my uh, especially when I was a very very young child, and then growing up as a child. Things then settled down kind of quite radically when I grew up and became an adult. Having said that, I always had this fear of death. And then when my dad died, and I just told you this actually in relation to something else, when my dad died a couple of years ago, about 7 years ago, I then kind of plunged into the world of NDEs and NDE testimony as a way of kind of basically saying, right, well, where is he now, type thing. I wasn't religious. He wasn't religious. My mum and uncle were Catholics. My uncle was a minister, so he was like deeply invested in the Catholic Church. I was brought up a Catholic, but I kind of could never really take it seriously. And my dad was never religious. But that journey into those testimonies, like hundreds of testimonies that I read over the course of a couple of months after he died, it just dissipated that sense of fear of death, like totally. Um, Yeah, and there's no doubt in my mind that something else happens. We like the kind of meanness of me continues in some way. I don't have any doubt about that whatsoever. And there's very few things that I'm like 100% on, but I'm quite close to 100% on that actually. Well, that was a kind of amazing beginning to the. It's all just going to go downhill from now. Right. So now with because I've been listening to your podcast and I'm a big fan of it. Like I think it is really interesting. And like how do you because what it is about your podcast is that you're clearly a really excellent researcher and you're an excellent writer, but you're also a really interesting thinker as well. Yeah. Like you're an excellent thinker. Like you bring together these strands in a very interesting way. Like how do you kind of see yourself, if you like? Do you see yourself as, and also maybe kind of connected to that as well is this question of what aims do you have for the podcast, or kind of where do you see the podcast in relation to you, researching, exploring this information and kind of giving it out in a particular way?
That's such a great question, and I really appreciate you asking it. I think it's hard. I don't really know I don't always know what to call myself, because I
Yeah.
don't know what I am exactly. Like I've had other podcasts before, and so like in some ways, but podcasting just seems like the easiest medium for me in terms of putting stuff out there. So I don't know that I necessarily consider myself to be a podcaster. I don't know if I even have like a passion for that. To be honest, I like don't love podcasting, which is really funny. Because I continually have a podcast. Um, I don't know. I think so. I said that I've only been into this for like 2 years, right? Which is true. But the thing is that I grew up in a really kind of interesting household. Like my parents had both grown up in poverty, more or less. My dad more so than my mom. And they really made something of themselves. Like my dad was born to like a 16-year-old mother who had 5 kids in the next 5 years, and he grew up in poverty. He remembers burning the furniture on Christmas Day to like stay warm
God.
and like that kind of thing,
Yeah.
and then he, never, he got kicked out of school and all of these things. And he eventually went back, got his GED, went to college, and he became a doctor. He became a psychiatrist.
Wow.
So, and my mom had not quite that hard knock of a story, but she also worked very hard to make something of herself. And I think that I had these two parents that in some ways more or less were sort of raised by wolves, and they didn't really like, they had children, but they didn't really know like how to talk to a child, which
Uh-huh.
in some ways really worked out for me because my parents were always in school while I was growing up, and they were always like talking to me about what they were working on and what they were learning. And my dad was, he was a Jungian, and he was, very into Jung. And I mean, I was in grade school and my dad would be like reading Rupert Sheldrake to me and that sort of thing.
Fantastic.
And so I grew up in this sort of in that sort of environment. My dad sort of had these thoughts, and it
Yeah,
was really
yeah, yeah, yeah,
my
yeah.
dad died when I was 20, so it was really like my dad's death that kind of like moved me away from all of those things and made me be like, well, clearly there's no God, because I was so
Right.
devastated over his death.
Right. Yeah.
So I grew up that way. And I think that, the way that I approach information and the way that I communicate really is in a lot of ways a credit to my parents, who are both really brilliant people who never spoke to me like I was a child, and who really pushed, like actively taught me how to think critically. Yeah. And I really owe them for that, because I think that I think that my gifts come from them, but I don't always know how to qualify it or what to call it. In terms of what you asked about, like where I see myself going with all of this, in some ways, I feel like I don't totally know. What I care about more than anything, more than I care about UFOs, I feel like UFOs are kind of just like a way to hook people. It's like a really interesting mystery, but it's not really the thing that I don't know that I'll always necessarily be in the UFO space. The thing that I'm most passionate about is consciousness, the nature of reality. Why are we here? What is this thing? And I
Yeah.
think that UFOs are like a really interesting way to start like picking at the kind of edges of that story that don't totally make sense, and to start to recognize that like there's more to this life than we've been told.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that, and that comes across really clearly in your podcast as well. Um, and it's interesting because you've got a day, and I'll ask you about this later on, but you've got this day. Are you calling it Consciousness Day?
It'll be the
For the
Consciousness Symposium.
Oh, sorry, right. This Consciousness Symposium within the kind of overarching 2-day conference. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I really wanted, to me, it was really important to have that aspect of it. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a sneak peek of where that day is going to go. Is like we're going to be kind of we're co-creating that event. All the speakers who are involved are co-creating that consciousness symposium together, because
That's
our goal is
fantastic.
really to make an argument for the idea that the UFO topic is ultimately subsumed by the
Yeah.
consciousness topic. And so that's sort of,
Absolutely.
I'm excited
Absolutely.
about that.
That's really interesting. So you're working with it's Jay and is it Darren as well?
Yes, Jay and then Darren, aka Exo Academian. And then we just added to that day Phil Ford and JF Martell from the Phenomenal Weird Studies podcast. They are
Uh-huh.
not necessarily UFO guys, but they kind of approach the phenomenon from a different angle. And
Uh-huh.
I'm really excited to have them involved.
That's fantastic. Excellent. And we'll talk about the conference a little bit later.
Mhm.
But there's this bigger question that you're always addressing in your podcast, always kind of like reaching for something beyond, most of the other podcasts I listen to. And it's really, really exciting stuff. It's really incredibly well put together stuff. I wonder, like, how much of it, and maybe you've kind of partly answered this, but because so as an example, yeah, you've got this what a pattern of you do your podcast about a particular topic, whatever, and then you'll say, and we'll be talking about that one in the next, we'll be continuing in the next episode, and you think, oh, hold on a minute, she's got this all like laid out. Like, are you like some kind of like if you go into a kind of into a captain's office in a television show about police, they've got everything kind of laid out on the wall, is it all like kind of laid out and you're going, right, that's episode 19. God, well, I tell you what, they're going to love episode 30. I haven't got there yet, but it's all kind of on the board in your office or whatever. Or is it like laid out, or is it that you're kind of like yourself kind of learning and piecing it together, and as you kind of read more and consume more information, you're then thinking, hold on, this is quite interesting, let's go down this road?
So that's a great question. It's okay. So this is all going to sound crazy, but I'm trying to stop censoring myself and just say the truth about what's going on with me. It's like a process that I'm in right now. So the truth is that when I had that experience where I sort of saw that I was supposed to do this podcast, the entire outline came to me of the first season, which I'm still working through now. And the outline that I did that first day, which is so crazy because I was only like 3 months into it, I didn't really know. I didn't have the lay of the land yet. I didn't know the things. I didn't have enough information to make an outline that was as good as what I made. And I didn't know how good it was at the time.
Yeah.
And as I've just taken it each episode is a time. I still go back to that same outline. I pull it out. What's next? And what's crazy about the creative process of this for me has been so deeply rewarding, and in some ways its own kind of spiritual practice, because yes, I work very hard. I read a lot. I am meticulous about my note taking, and I work very hard. But there's a way in which these episodes come together, and the way that they layer on top of each other and that things come together, it's uncanny how it happens. It's like there's this moment usually about halfway through writing an episode where it kind of takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
It never is the thing that I thought it was going to be, and things start to connect to each other. I always describe it, it's like a plant that kind of like stretches towards the light, and my episodes start to stretch towards this light, and it's not me, it's something else, and I feel it sounds, I feel wild saying this stuff, but I feel like I'm collaborating with something and I don't know what that is. And I make no claims about it. And I don't think it's unique to me. I think that this is like what creativity is, like how a lot of people experience creativity. So I'm not trying to like say I'm being like guided by the alien mothership or something, you know, but it's been a really profound experience for me, the way that it has unfolded, and that I've learned actually to start building these in a much more intuitive way, where sometimes I'll just hear about a book and I know that I need that book for my next episode and I don't know why, or I'll just pick something up off a shelf and flip
Right.
to the
Yeah.
page and I'm like, there's the thing I need. There's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just a
Yeah. Yeah.
wild process at this point.
Yeah. That's fantastic, because that really reminds me of a couple of things. So I make, well, I don't anymore, but I used to make theater performances for years. And it would be kind of devised, small scale devised performance. Okay. So you would go into a studio with a couple of things like a poem or a scene from a film or some kind of like physical gesture or some like a whole bunch of things, maybe like the name of a place or whatever, and you make a theater show about that stuff, or at least that would be your beginning of making a theater show about it. Yeah. And the number of like synchronicities that happen when you're in that space, it doesn't always happen, because sometimes, you know, whatever, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen. But it's astonishing how often it does happen, that you're just resonating with something, you know, especially if you're working with a group of people that you trust and they know you, you know, you're just like, stuff happens. It's incredible. It is like this amazing kind of intuitive, creative process. And a friend of mine who was in that show, who's probably the most kind of intuitive person I know, she has this game called the library game. Okay. And this is an exercise that she does, whereby if ever she's kind of like stuck for something, she's doing some writing and she's stuck for something, she plays the library game. And essentially what it is that she'll just kind of like wander around in the library, like specifically, you know, getting lost, essentially, kind of intentionally getting lost in the library. And then she'll turn around and she'll pick out the book, do that. And then that's what she's looking for. And the number of times that it works, it's just like, there's something going on here, you know? So I know exactly what you mean about that sense of, you know, collaborating with something that is, you know, not a person, but some kind of something is resonating. I absolutely get what you're talking about there, Kelly. And it's really interesting that you keep coming back to this outline that you had planned out, you know, so early on in your process. And with that, then I guess there's this question of, so you mentioned episode one. Can I ask? Sorry, season one. Can you talk a little bit about like when is? Because we're on episode 19 at the moment, and at
Yes.
the end
Yeah.
of episode 19, you say, and the next one we're going to look about a simulation. And so, by
Yes.
the
I
way,
have a,
sorry, just to say, Kelly, if you're listening to this, right, you're a listener to Paranormal podcast and you Paranormal Blip, and you're not listening to Kelly's podcast, like it genuinely, it is as good as we're talking about it, because you talk about it in a really brilliant way, and it is as good as that. So you need to listen to this podcast. So I just thought I'd, you know, kind of state
well,
the.
thank you so much. But yeah, I do have a roadmap. I have, the only thing that's different about the outline is that, like, as you've seen, I do, the outline had each topic being its own episode, whereas as I've gotten into things, certain topics have gone into
Yeah,
multi-parts.
yeah.
So originally I think it was going to be 15 episodes. I think by the time I'm done, so I'm on 19 right now. There's two more in this series. I'll be talking about simulation theory next, and then after that I'll be the third part I'll be talking about um, Donald Hoffman's work and Jeffrey Kripal's work, you know, this idea of kind of consciousness being foundational.
Yeah,
I'll then
fantastic.
go into a series that'll be 2 or 3 episodes long about Skinwalker Ranch, because I don't think, I
Uh-huh.
think so many people, they just think it's a show. Like they don't recognize how much of the modern, like what we're
Yeah,
dealing with in the news right now and since 2017 really started at Skinwalker.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So I want to talk about that.
That's
And
brilliant.
then I just want to do like a wrap up at the end of kind of like, here's where we are now. And then I'll move into season 2, which is going to be much more ambitious, actually. And that'll be focusing on anomalous experience, because at this point, I'm laying the groundwork with like this last episode, I guess the last couple, of that, but I felt like I really needed to kind of like warm people up and get people ready to have these conversations about, because I think the experiencer aspect of the UFO phenomenon gets left out far too often because people are just kind of afraid of the stigma of it all. And so I'm really working to kind of create a framework within which people feel more comfortable talking about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, let's talk about a couple of the things that you've been talking about in your podcast so far. So first of all, the Tom DeLong, I think it's the second of the episodes on him. You have this, you kind of get to the, okay, so what does Tom believe then? And then it's this amazing, like, it was probably about, I don't know, 8 minutes, 10 minutes long. You just lay out with this music playing in the background, you lay out what Tom believes. Yeah. And I thought that this is a really good thing to kind of pipe into history lessons at school.
Yeah.
I just, I guess the kind of, it's so off the wall, but at the same time, though, of course, like you say, in great detail, you cannot dismiss Tom, because we know the provenance of which he speaks, So it's like just this extraordinary 8 minute section of that second episode of Tom DeLonge, where it's just like, talks about these various things. The pyramids, there's a few of those I hadn't heard before. The pyramid under Antarctica, which is blocking the kind of consciousness potential of humans. That's a good one, isn't it?
Oh yeah. It's in Alaska actually, but yeah,
Oh, is
that's
it in Alaska? Sorry.
yeah, that's a crazy story that just like pops up on the fringes of stories.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get more information about it, but I feel like everyone, as soon as they hear that, there's something about that idea that's so compelling, of this like supposed to be this black pyramid that's bigger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, that's underground, like out in the wilderness in Alaska. And allegedly it's like suppressing human consciousness. Like, what does that even mean? No one knows. And
Yeah.
it's the most compelling story that you can't find anything about. Tom just like randomly mentions it sometimes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then you devote quite a few episodes to the space program, and not to, I mean, the thing is, basically, I don't have any questions about this. I'm just like kind of saying my favorite bit, some of my favorite bits of your podcast. I mean, what's the question I can ask about well, what was interesting about there is that you go into the numerous times that numerous astronauts have spoken about kind of non-human intelligences, essentially, which is, I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. It's quite difficult to kind of position yourself in relation to this, really, because I think it was the previous episode where you talk about the possibility of the moon being a kind of occupied moon, whereby the folks that are occupying it are kind of looking down upon us, and that being like terrifying. So like
Yeah.
everywhere you turn in this podcast, you're being kind of surprised and delighted by the kind of hugeness of the ideas. And then we get to Plato's Cave. Now I do want to ask you about Plato's Cave, because it works as a kind of perfect and is it an analogy or a metaphor? I'm not sure.
I think it's an allegory.
Oh, an allegory. That's it. Yes. It works as a perfect allegory
Yeah.
for our situation now. So for those of obviously listen to the podcast. I think I mentioned you should listen to the podcast. But for those of us that aren't aware of Plato's Cave, could you just maybe kind of lay out that briefly, please, Kelly?
Absolutely. So Plato's Cave is a chapter in Plato's larger work, Republic, which in a lot of ways has been haunting me and haunting the podcast. I can't get away from Republic. But the idea of Plato's Cave is that, so it's an allegory, it's a story. And in the story, basically the concept is that there are these prisoners who are in a cave, and they're tied up and they can't look to their left or their right. And they're just looking straight ahead at the wall of the cave. And then behind the prisoners, there is a giant fire. And there are people who are walking around in front of the fire, and they have like sort of, you can think of them as like puppets or something that are casting shadows onto the wall. And the prisoners are looking at the shadows on the wall. And to them, this is reality, these shadows on the wall. And the whole thought exercise that Plato brings the reader through with this story is that, okay, so imagine that one of these prisoners just like turned around and saw the fire, and suddenly they're confronted with the fact that their reality isn't really reality. It's this projection from a deeper, realer reality, like something that's actually more real. And then it says, and then he says, and imagine that this person then goes up out of the cave and talks about what that would be like to suddenly to have been in the darkness and then to go out into the light, and that you wouldn't even be able to see and you wouldn't know what you were looking at. And what would, if you had been down in this cave looking at shadows, like what does a tree mean to you? Like how do you even conceptualize what that means? And it's I think it's a really great way to get people thinking about what are the illusions in our life that we take for reality, and what would the process of waking up to that illusion look like? And it's painful, it's scary, you don't know what's going on, and if you go back in and you tell the other prisoners what you've seen, they'll probably think you're crazy, and they might even kill you. Plato and many of his cohorts all ended up being killed by the state. And so, these are kind of dangerous. It's dangerous to go back into the cave is something, it's like a very big part of the story. And so, he's kind of hit upon this sort of structure of not just our lived human experience, but what it's like to become enlightened is probably a big word, but what is education or wisdom? What does that process look like for the human?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it reminds me that we're so kind of like small and naive and limited, not me and you, but like everyone else, like people are small and naive and limited, but at the same time we think that we know it all, basically, in this funny kind of, not most people have this sense, if they think about any of this stuff at all, they think, oh, well, yeah, like, the cutting edge science all is going to kind of make the world a better place, we're kind of safe, I don't really think about, what happens after death, but, I'm sure it's going to be okay. And so there's no real kind of interrogation of our lack of perception and our lack of a kind of intelligent questioning and kind of like pushing at the boundaries, and there's a real arrogance as well that we have about our kind of safety and our continuity, yeah. And I've thought that for a long time, this how can I put it, what we where we think we're at a given time is kind of just based on the idea that back in the day, people weren't as smart as us. People weren't as kind of, they didn't have it all going on like we have. Yeah. But we have got something that they didn't have, and we're going to be okay. And we actually are kind of, we can do the thing that we do. We can live the life that we live, and we're going to be all right. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah, 100% it does. And I think, part of the reason the story has been so important for me is because I spent years just thinking anything woo was crazy and UFOs weren't real and none of this stuff could possibly be true. And until I looked into it myself, until I actually sat down and did the research and started to recognize the overwhelming evidence for the reality of this phenomenon. And it was extraordinarily humbling to recognize, I'd always considered myself to be an independent thinker. I'd always considered myself to be a very strong critical thinker. And so to recognize that how many of my beliefs, and by the way, it turns out it was like all of them, and I think that's most people, I had never were based like they were based on just somebody told me that it was the status quo. It was somebody I trusted. And I was like, that sounds right. And then I just filed it away as a belief. And I'm like, that's what's true now. But I had never actually like done the investigation myself. And so you recognize how many of these like ideas and beliefs and judgments that you're carrying around with yourself that don't even come from you. They come from other people, and you've never interrogated them. You've never, even given them a second glance. And it's a very humbling experience. And I think that it's important for all of us to realize, not just, I think it's a great metaphor for, awakening to the reality of the UFO phenomenon, but I think it's so much bigger than that also. It's about recognizing what you know and what you don't know, what it takes to actually know something, what you can actually know. These are all questions that we need to be asking ourselves all the time, because otherwise we're just kind of zombies doing what we're told. And I don't think that's what anybody really strives to be or wants to be.
Yeah, and that was brilliantly put, by the way. That's what I was trying to say.
We collaborated. We got there.
Oh yeah. Beautifully put. And then that kind of beautifully brings us to episode 19. Okay. So episode 19 is like, I think I put it on Twitter a couple of days ago, that it's a masterpiece. I mean, I genuinely mean this, Kelly. Like, it should be like, if you're listening, I got a mate, this ex-gardener friend of mine, who's contacted me a couple of weeks ago saying, oh, like, I don't know why, but he's like, wants to kind of forward information about UFOs to other people. Yeah. And it's not just UFOs, but, anomalous experiences and, kind of like other ways of looking at the world, and to kind of challenge people's assumptions, which is fair enough. I mean, I do a podcast about it, so it's, I can't criticize him for doing that. And I kind of sent him a few things, but this is something that you could send out to people. Episode 19, it's this absolutely brilliant kind of crystallization of so much stuff. I mean, really, like you pack it all in there, from the Big Bang to, kind of going on from the Big Bang. And when it comes to that, how do you make something like that episode? What was your process in making that episode?
Oh, well, I think that one probably it only took me about maybe 3 or 4 days to write it, but in a lot of ways I had been writing it for a year, at least in my head. Every time I'm washing my hair, every time I'm in the car, I'm thinking through these problems. And I had this giant doc of, I kind of knew what I wanted this to be and what I wanted it to be about. And I had this giant doc that I started, and I would just dump quotes and page numbers and all sorts of things from books that I had read. And so it was really kind of just a matter of like combing through all of that and figuring out what the most important and compelling pieces are. It was a really challenging episode to write because the ideas are very big, but I wanted it to not be much more than an hour, and I wanted it to be digestible. I wanted it to be something that you could sit down and grasp. And so that was really difficult. So, and also I'm like, listen, I'm not a scientist, whatever I am, I'm not that. And and so I approach this with a lot of humility. I don't want to say things that I don't feel like I can back up. And I want to I double, triple check my work to make sure that I'm not saying something, although if anybody ever corrected me, I'd be very open to that. But yeah, I mean, so I worked like I said, I was a marketer, and I did this for years. Content was kind of my big thing. Content, branding, PR, but mostly content. So, I've really approached the podcast with the skill set that I learned through marketing. So much of marketing, the whole thing is just meeting somebody where they are at the right place at the right time with the right message. And so I really just tried to think through, how do I know where my audience is, hopefully, because most people, I'm very lucky in that most people have listened to all the episodes. Like most of my listeners have listened to them all.
Mm-hmm.
and just to be like, okay, so we're here. What's the straightest line? What's the easiest way? And so I think that skill set has really helped me, because I think about content in a very structured, in a very structured way. And that skill set has helped me kind of process some of these bigger pieces.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see the work. I mean, it really is, it's a brilliant episode, and that conciseness as well, because for something so large and all encompassing, it is really, in the writing you can really tell the conciseness. And also as well, it's worth mentioning that your kind of episode notes are excellent, and it's all backed up with the website as well. So, and you've got, tell us about the book, please.
Yes, absolutely. So I just released book one in November. And so book one is essentially it's basically the first 10 episodes of the podcast, and book two will be the next 10 or so. It'll probably be more than 10 actually. Um and so basically when all of my episodes, except for the interview episodes, which I've only just recently started doing, are entirely scripted.
Yeah.
I find I couldn't have done that last episode without scripting it. Like these topics are big enough and sticky enough that I don't even trust myself to necessarily like talk through them and to sound intelligent and to hit all the points that I want to hit. I feel much more comfortable with the written word than I do in any other medium. And so, and then each of the episodes is like 10,000 words long. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, oh, this is a book. And I also recognize that a lot of people, as much as it's wild to people like you and me who love podcasts, a lot of people don't listen to podcasts. And so I wanted to, my focus has always been on how do I get in front of these ideas and this information in front of as many people as possible. And so the book was just like another way to do that. And so when I wrap this season, I'll put that into book two. And I think it's just really helpful, and it's all there. It's got the bibliography. You can see the full sources. I'd love in a future edition to include some illustrations and stuff of some of like the stickier stuff, like the double slit experiment and some of the cooler archaeological stuff. So I'm hoping once I complete season one that I'm able to put out kind of like a big all-in-one version that has illustrations and that sort of thing. But that'll be probably later this year.
Fantastic. And obviously all of the content that we're talking about is going to be in my episodes notes. So all right, so the message here, okay, my aim, going back to Amal Rajan, my aim was for you to talk about the podcast. Tick. We've done that. and so my aim now, listener, is I'm looking at can you tell I'm looking at the microphone, Kelly? Can you see when I do that? It means I'm looking at the microphone. My aim now, listener, is for you to listen to, not let's turn this off now. Oh no, hold on, wait for the end of it, because Kelly's still talking in a minute. But after that, listen to her podcast if you're not listening to it. But I imagine that quite a lot of you are listening to it, and you're just waiting for episode 20, which is, when is episode 20 coming along, by the way?
So it's getting a little complicated because I'm in the last 6 weeks before the conference. So I'm going to be doing 2 bonus episodes are going to be the next 2 things that I release. One is going to come out this Thursday, and that will be just a bonus episode where I'll be featuring some of the speakers. I interviewed Dr. Michael Masters and Bryce Sable, and then also the Weird Studies guys, and just talking about the conference. And then the next one I'll do will be another bonus episode with a gentleman by the name of Thomas Carey, who is one of the co-authors of a book called UFO Secrets at Wright-Patterson. So I wanted obviously to kind of get that. And then after that one, we'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming, but I wanted to get those 2. And so you should see episode 20 probably at the end of April sometime would be my guess.
Yeah. But this bonus episode is coming on Thursday, yeah?
Yes.
So that's good. That's good to know. So well, let's talk about the conference now. So this is and obviously put me right, Kelly, if I if I butcher this, but I think I've read it down correctly. The Ohio UFO Heritage Conference. Is that correct? Yeah. And it's on May the 5th and 6th.
Yep, correct.
Is that right? Yeah. And so let's talk about that then, Kelly. So what's the just you've been in PR.
Right.
I don't know what this is. Amal Rajan would never do that. He's much more on the ball than that. He would never put that out. So yeah, over to you.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled about this conference. I couldn't be happier about it. I'm a lifelong Ohioan myself. So I'm from the state of Ohio, where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is. And I really wanted to bring an event to Ohio. And I thought to myself, the best place to do it would be at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, because nothing like that has ever happened there. And within a week, I got an email from this guy. His name is John Horvath, who was a listener of my podcast, who came to me and said, "Hey, I want to do a UFO conference at Wright-Patterson."
Oh, wait.
And he'd already done all of the work in terms of like the groundwork. Like they had already gotten the city council and like the Chamber of Commerce. They'd already booked the place. We're going to be at the historic Hope Hotel, which is literally at the gates of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It has a Wright-Patterson address. And yeah, they had already handled everything, and they just needed someone to come in and, number one, book the speakers, which I luckily had the connections to do because of the podcast and through the great generosity of our friends, J. Christopher King and James Iandoli, who invited me to be a co-host at the Inquire Anomalous event. So I had some of these contacts. Yeah. And so it was just a perfect fit. I spent my time in marketing. I've organized many conferences and such, events in the past. So it's just been a really natural fit, and it's a great team. And I'm so excited to, there's over 50,000 retired military in the area right around Wright-Patterson. And when you go down to that area and you talk to people, the fact that there's anomalous materials at Wright-Patterson is it's not even an open secret. It's just a reality that they live with in that little area of the world. And I'm so excited to bring this to the UFO community, but I have to say I'm even more excited to bring it to the retired military who live in that area, who maybe have been waiting decades for this kind of conversation to take place at Wright-Patterson. And I will say the Air Force Base has been extraordinarily supportive. So far, the Air Force even put us on their website to like promote it, which I didn't know if they would do. Yeah, so they've been cool about it, I have to say. I wasn't sure how they would feel, but they've been cool about it. So it's been great.
That's fantastic. And so let's talk about the speakers then that you have coming along, please.
Yes, I'm thrilled about them. I tell people I feel like it's kind of a coup, because I basically just created the conference that I wanted to go to, and now I get to go to it. So we have James Fox will be there. We're going to, on Friday night, he's going to be doing a private screening of Moment of Contact, which is absolutely phenomenal. I'm sure a lot of people there have seen it, but we're going to get to watch it with James Fox, which like, how cool is that? And then he'll be doing a Q&A on Saturday as well. We have Dr. Diana Walsh-Pasulka, who I make no qualms about the fact that she is like my absolute hero. I think she's the coolest human alive. So she will be there talking about some of the material from her new book, Encounters, that's coming out in November of this year. So, and so much of her work has focused on the phenomenon and its sort of interaction with the space program and with the military. And she's going even further into that in her next book. So like, wonderful to have her there. We have the phenomenal Bryce Zabel. He is from the Need to Know podcast with Ross Coulthart. I think most people are familiar. They're huge names. And Bryce has like the most incredible background. Like he created the Dark Skies television series. I mean, he's written books with Richard Dolan. He's been all through the UFO community, and then also done just a lot of other media work as well. I think he was a writer for like Lois and Clark and like LA Law and a bunch of other cool. So nobody has more cool stories than this guy. And he has a phenomenal story about working on Dark Skies and like the Men in Black showing up. And so you'll get to hear that at the conference and how he handled that situation. And I think it's so interesting, and it's so important to talk about the phenomenon and the media, and how the media,
absolutely,
has informed our belief on and he has some really interesting things to say about that.
Yeah.
We've got Dr. Michael Masters, who is an anthropologist out of Montana Tech, who is just absolutely brilliant, who has written a couple of books on the extraterrestrial and or future human hypothesis.
Yeah.
A brilliant man. We have, who do we have? Micah Hanks. Micah Hanks, founder of Debrief Media and also the host of the wonderful Micah Hanks program. He has done some phenomenal, some of the best reporting that's been done. You know, he and Christopher Sharp, and there's a few people in the community who've really been doing, putting the rest of the mainstream media to shame, honestly, with their.
Absolutely.
So that's just Saturday. I'll pause there.
Fantastic. And then you also have this, well, we were talking about earlier, weren't we? The Consciousness Symposium.
Yes.
So is that what you're calling it? Yeah.
Yeah. So that'll be during the day on Friday. And that will be, so we have Phil Ford and Jeff Martell from Weird Studies. They are brilliant. It's one of my favorite podcasts. I think they're just the coolest. We have Exo Academian, Darren King, who is brilliant and doing just some of the best work out there in terms of consciousness and the phenomenon, and has been like a real mentor to me in some ways. I'm very appreciative of him. And then J. Christopher King, who is maybe one of my like closest friends in the space, actually. Like Jay is just one of the most brilliant and also kind people I know you've had him on your podcast like 3 times, and he's I don't have to tell you how great Jay is, but Jay has been so helpful to me in creating this conference and you know, being my kind of like phone a friend when I'm panicking and I don't know what to do. So and he's also the founder of the Experiencer Group. He's absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to kind of show people. I feel it feels kind of subversive to do something that's so consciousness focused, like on a stage at Wright-Patterson, and I love that sort of thing. It's exactly my kind of rebellion, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, totally. And maybe we'll leave with some thoughts about consciousness, because here's where I'm at. Okay, and in my last couple of, like, whatever it's been, year and a half doing this podcast, there's been some things that I've been quite relaxed about talking about, quite confident about talking about. Yeah. Like the NDE stuff, I'm quite confident about that, about kind of how I relate myself, how I situate myself with it. Then there's other things that I'm still kind of working out, you know, in my own head. So I did this episode about physical mediumship, okay, and it was a really interesting thing to look into. It's a really interesting thing to research, and it comes off of Leslie Kane's work in that space. Yeah. And I trust Leslie Kane, and I talk about this on that episode, you know, whereby, but there's a part of me that is kind of like in a way using this platform to articulate where I'm at in relation to all of this stuff. Yeah. And some things I'm confident at, and essentially kind of, I'm there more or less. Other things I'm still kind of working at. Okay. So consciousness is the big kahuna, basically, isn't it? And there's lots of ways of kind of talking about consciousness. So you mentioned that you're like working out. Tell us about how you're approaching that day, and how you're going to talk about consciousness, and how the others are going to do that. Please.
Yes, and that's a great question. And I probably should have mentioned in that. So I will also be speaking at the Consciousness Symposium, and I will be presenting my work for the first time. So the work that I've been doing with the podcast is more, I mean, not that that's not my work, but I mean, that's like a meta synthesis of the topic. But what I will be presenting at Wright Pat will be my contribution to the field. I'm working on another book on the side that I'm hoping will be out. It'll probably be about 2 years by the time I get it all done. It's a massive undertaking, but you know, I think that the way that we are approaching this, because I've had some meetings with Darren and with Jay, you know, we really wanted to be intentional about this and to create something, not just to have speakers around a theme, but to really kind of take people on kind of a journey, to take advantage of the fact that we're all friends with each other and really co-create something. And so, we'll be starting out the day with the Weird Studies guys, so that we can talk through. What I find so interesting about them is that they utilize this process that they call weirding in their approach, and basically kind of it kind of comes down to the idea that if you look at anything long enough, sort of these otherworldly qualities sort of start to reveal themselves, whether it's a piece of art or book, or you start to see these kind of holes. So they have a really interesting, so we kind of want to start there with this idea that like the weirdness of the world is not limited to UFOs or even to paranormal phenomena, but that there's something else going on that we have a hard time pointing to. And then it'll kind of build through the day. I'm not sure what order. Jay and I need to sit down and figure out exactly what we're talking about, which one of us will go in order. And then it's going to end with EXO at the end of the day, really kind of making his sort of final argument on the idea that like what we're really dealing with here is that whatever the UFO phenomenon is, that it's ultimately a function of consciousness, which is not the same thing as saying that we're like imagining it or that we're making it up or that it's not real, but rather that there is something about the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality that we haven't cracked yet, but that is pointed to and hinted at through these anomalous experiences and through the UFO phenomenon. And we really just wanted to kind of leave it there to give people that idea, because I think what Jay, Darren, and I in particular really believe in very strongly is that like we're on the cusp of something profound here, not even more profound than the recognition that we're not alone, as though that's not just like earth shattering and mind blowing enough, but that the nature of our reality is not that what we have been told, and that there's something bigger going on here. And so I'm really excited for that day. I think that's going to be cool.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And the tickets, you can get tickets, and the tickets, the link for the tickets are in the episode description. And for everyone that's not in the States, then you can also live stream it, can't you? So there's tickets for that as well. And there's quite a lot of options in terms of the tickets, isn't there, Kelly?
Yeah, we wanted people to be able to kind of pick their poison, and we knew that, the consciousness symposium might not be for everyone, but so we wanted to give people an option of what they wanted to attend, what they didn't, so they can make the experience whatever they want. There's also a ton of, for people who are attending live, there's also a lot of really cool stuff going on. They're doing a whole bunch of local events. There's like a 5K. They're doing like a little pet parade and costume contest. Like there's a lot of cute stuff. But there's also the Air Force Museum nearby, which is free to the public. And I went there the last time I was down there, and it is breathtaking. I have just never seen anything like it. So for people who might want to hit that up instead of the Consciousness Symposium, we wanted to have options.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So Kelly, so I'm gonna, like, if you say no, then I'll just edit this bit out. But have you thought about a dream and reality thing?
I can think of one on top of my head.
Non-stop.
I feel like all my craziest stories are like not necessarily stories I would want to share.
No, totally. Yeah, that's okay. I just thought I'd come back to it and ask you. So that's cool. So listen, if we go back into it then, and I'll cut that bit out. So I'll just ask you about your, like social media and where people can find you, that kind of question. You always get and things like that, don't you? And then I'll say thank you, and then that's it. So let's go back into it. I'll just put a little pause here because it's easier to edit for me, if there's a little kind of silence for a few seconds. So Kelly, that sounds fantastic. And I'm looking forward to, I'll get my ticket and I'll be live streaming it and sitting in Devon at whatever time it is, comparative to Ohio. Is that what is your kind of dateline called? Is it called Mountain Time or?
We're on Eastern Time.
Oh, are you? Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Is Mountain Time like really far away from you?
Yeah, that's like, I think like Colorado, kind of out,
Right,
not
okay,
west,
yeah,
but not all the way west.
Okay, yeah. All right, so my geography is shocking, isn't it? Anyway, so listen, thank you so much. Thank you. really smooth ending there. Thank you so much, Kelly. I've absolutely loved speaking to you. And I can't wait for the next episode, which is Thursday. So, bookmark or follow the UFO Rabbit Hole podcast for that. And do you want to just say how people can contact you via Twitter, that kind of thing, please?
Absolutely. So you can find me at Twitter. It's UFO underscore rabbit underscore hole. Probably the best way to find all of my links is either through my link tree in the bio on Twitter, or you can go to my website, which is uforabbithole.com.
Yeah.
And you can find all the information about that. If you're interested in the conference, that is at ufoheritage.com. Yeah, and Pete, it has been amazing talking to you. I appreciate so much you having me on your podcast. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And obviously all those sites that you've just mentioned, all those websites are going to be in the episode description. So Kelly, thank you so much. It's been a proper real pleasure. I'm such a fan of your work, and it's brilliant to kind of, get to grips of how you work and how you make the podcast. So thank you so much for speaking to me.
Thank you.